Hello there and welcome to my guide for painting Marvel Zombies Thor. As you can see, the first thing I've done is sprayed them both black with some matte black spray from Colourforge. From there I then used a Baden black to tidy up any areas the spray might have missed. I then used Iron Hand Steel to paint all the areas that would be silver. That includes the buckles on his outfit, his hammer, there's also an axe and a helmet on normal Thor. All of this was then given a wash with some Nuln Oil. And once that wash had dried, I start to give the black some highlights with some Corvus Black, followed by a second highlight of a 50-50 mix of Corvus Black and Eshin Grey. I then highlighted the metal areas with a 50-50 mix of Iron Hand Steel and Stormhost Silver, followed by a second highlight of Stormhost Silver. Next, I'll paint his boots and his belt with some Avalanche Sunset. We are painting on black, so that will take at least a couple of coats. And then we'll give it a wash with some Army Painter Soft Tone. And while that wash dries, we'll start to move on his cape, and for that we're going to use Mephiston Red, which will then get its own wash with some Carroburg Crimson. Once the wash is dried on the boots and belt, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Avalanche Sunset and Dawn Yellow for the first set of highlights, and Dawn Yellow just by itself for the second set. Before we continue with his cape, I'm going to get his trousers started, so I'm going to use my Craggy Blue for the main colour, and that'll get a wash with some Drakenhof Nightshade. Once the wash is dried on the cape, I'm going to relayer the Mephiston Red, making sure I avoid any recesses. I'll then brighten things up with a 50-50 mix of Mephiston Red and Evil Sun Scarlet. This will be followed by Evil Sun Scarlet just by itself. And then for the final highlight, it will be a 50-50 mix of Evil Sun Scarlet and Wild Rider Red. I'll then relayer the Macraggy Blue on his trousers, once again avoiding the recesses. And I'll give it a very subtle highlight of a 50-50 mix of Macraggy Blue and Calgar Blue. And now I can move on to the skin, so I'm going to use Bugman's Glow for the Hero Thor, while Zombie Thor gets some Rakarth Flesh. Then all of the skin will be washed with some Brightland Flesh Shade. Once that wash is dry, I'll do the first highlight with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Catian Flesh Tone on Hero Thor. And before I go any further, and so it's easier to fix any mistakes that I make now, I'm going to start painting his eyes with some Abaddon Black, followed by Matte White, and then finally Abaddon Black once again to dot the pupils. I'll then go back to the skin and use Cadian Flesh Tone for the next highlight, followed by a 50-50 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh, and a final highlight of Kislev Flesh just by itself. For Zombie Thor, I'm going to use some Flayed One Flesh, slightly watered down than it normally would be, just so it sort of has a more translucent effect. Then I'll paint the open sores with some Bugman's Glow. And in his eye sockets and in those sores, I'll use some Carroburg Crimson just to darken things up slightly. I'll also paint his tongue with some Pink Horror. And I'll do a final highlight on the flesh with some Pallid Witch Flesh. I'm going to use some Fire Dragon Bright to paint his eyes. Some Morghast Bone to paint the stumps of bone that are sticking out of his arm, which I'll highlight with some Wraithbone. I'll then use some Matte White to paint his teeth. And then I'll use Xandri Dust to paint their hair and beard. All the hair will receive a wash with some Army Painter Soft Tone. Next, I'll paint the handle of Thor's hammer with some Dryad Bark. And I'll also use it to paint any muddy areas on the base. I'll then use Mournfang Brown to paint the little strap that's coming down from the hammer. And wash the handle and the strap with some Agrax Earthshade. While that dries, I'll dry brush Thor's hair with some Xandri Dust. Be careful with it though, at this point we don't really want to mess up that cape. Then we'll follow that dry brush with another dry brush of a 50-50 mix of Xandri Dust and Yubshanti Bone. Then I'm going to continue with the base and use some Dawnstone on all the rocks. I'm going to use Steel Legion Drab to paint the handle of the axe. Some Scrag Brown is used for highlighting the strap coming from the hammer. And I'm going to use a little bit of Gothel Brown just to quickly dry brush the mud on the base. And for the rocks, I'm going to use some Grey Sear. I'll then paint and tidy up the rims with some Abaddon Black. And then I'll wash the bases with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. And then finally, and you can skip this bit if you choose to, I'm going to use some blood for the Blood God just to bloody up those stumps and add some into Thor's mouth and beard. And with that, that's Thor finished. I really love the Zombies Thor. I love the sort of story that it's telling, that he's lost the power or the right to use his hammer anymore, and he is just a very well done model. Also, they're both really nice and easy to paint. Rocking in only about 3.5 hours for the pair. They, as I said earlier, were absolutely brilliant to paint. Lots of fun. If you follow this guide, I hope you found it useful, and thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more, thumbs up the video, and I will see you on the next one. Goodbye for now.